Okay, welcome back to the Love Examined playlist podcast, where we're using each song on our playlist as a jumping off point to explore ideas, theory, and practical tools for love, dating, relationships, and marriage. I am Ellie Bass, Jewish educator, life coach, healer, and I'm here with Avrum Nadigal, author, therapist, and fellow music nerd. Hi, Avrum.
Hi, Ellie.
By the way, before we jump in, if you haven't heard the song that we're about to talk about today, I suggest you go check out our Love Examined playlist on either Spotify or Apple Music to hear all the songs we've talked about so far, including this one. Speaking of which, okay, this song we're doing this week is Black Coffee
By Aviv.
by Aviv. Yeah, who's a local talent.
A young local talent, which really is incredible. Ellie, do you have a sense? I don't know. I was listening to the song. The production on the song is really high quality.
Yeah.
Do you know at all if Aviv writes her songs? I looked at her Instagram page. She plays guitar, or at least she has guitars hanging all over her room.
I think so. I think in the liner notes it says that she writes her songs. I'm pretty sure. So it's a good question.
Well, it's a great song. It reminds me a lot of when I first heard Feist. I think was it Feist who wrote the song 1, 2, 3, 4? Yeah. So I remember when that song hit, and then Apple picked it up. Feist is from Calgary, Alberta. When Apple picked it up, there was just a plethora of that kind of boppy sort of female singer-songwriter type stuff, and it's just so fantastic.
Well, I'll tell you what it reminded me of. So I was playing it in the car this morning with my kids and the other kids from their school that we carpool with, and so I played them this song, Black Coffee by Aviv, and then I played them Love Fool by the Cardigans, which is a song from the 90s, and another song by the Sundays. And all of them have this very similar high production, kind of young girl's voice, very sort of quirky and cool. And they were all like, is this all the same person? And I was like, no, it is not. But they do sound the same. So it's a really great genre that I always loved. And I think Aviv really has done a great job of reinterpreting that particular genre where it feels smart and coffee house and cool, but like young enough that people can like enjoy it on the pop list. I think actually she's right now on the CBC top 10 with one of her new songs. So it's really awesome. And shout out to her mom, Yael, and her for doing such incredible work. By the way, she does write her songs. I just looked that up. So yeah.
So all this to say, we are propping up Aviv, so it allows me to walk through the door and rip it all down as we go into the lyrics. And, I have to say, Aviv stole my heart with the Black Coffee title because I am a lover of coffee. And so, but I have to say,
yes.
As I was reading this as a songwriter myself and someone who took lyrics quite seriously in my angsty 20s, I was thinking about the metaphor of black coffee. And then my brain went to all sorts of places, because in the video, I think she's using a Tim Hortons cup, and no one drinks Tim Hortons coffee black. It's always double, as we say in Canada. You're always putting cream and sugar in, which is what makes Tim Hortons coffee so delicious, because the cream is like 18% cream and the sugar is sugar. So the idea that her relationship is like black coffee or something might have been the problem right there, because if you're drinking black coffee from Tim Hortons, it's going to be pretty disgusting. So,
you're saying if the coffee's good enough.
So my brain went in all sorts of places, and I wish Aviv was on this call, because then I would ask her, first of all, what is a high school kid drinking all this black coffee for? Okay, it's going to impact your sleep. And the second thing is, where did one get the metaphor of black coffee as akin to a relationship? Okay, there's my introductory comments.
Questions for the author. Excellent, good to know.
So let me ask you, Ellie. I picked out one verse. As you know, I do this for all of the songs we pick. There's always one line or two lines that really jump out at me that I want to focus on. So I got mine. Before I jump in, I'm curious to hear from you. what about this song moved you? Was there a specific stanza that spoke to you?
Yeah, I actually really loved thinking about the idea, like where she says all the memories and all the warnings, poured it all down the drain. And for me, at the end of the relationship, I think one of the big questions is, what should we pour down the drain? Like, should we literally just disappear the entire experience because it was horrible? Like, and we see people doing that. They just wipe people off their social media. They never want to talk about them again. Like, and some people don't do that. Some people stay friends with all of their exes, and that's a whole other way. So my question, that I would love to dig into at some point today is, what parts of a past relationship should we keep, and how? And what parts really should we let go of? And that would be something that I'm curious about.
Well, to come back to your first point, one of the ideas from the world that I work in is how you end a relationship is how you begin your next relationships. I have found this to be clinically relevant and personally relevant in my own life. So the idea that, what drives someone to want to completely erase the past from anything. So, which really lends itself to two questions in my mind. Number one, do you believe that history has anything to teach you? Now, some people say no.
Right.
I mean, I shouldn't say that. I actually don't know anyone who would say no, but some people treat history like it's useless. I don't think
there
that's
are
true.
a lot of people who would say, like, I never want to hear you say his name again. Right? Like, he who shall not be named. That is now, the situation with the ex, and you never ever want to talk about that experience ever again. So I think, maybe in other parts of their lives, they would say history is important to learn from. But with these particular relationships, they'll be like, yeah, I'm just never going to think about that again.
In the world of therapy, though, when you're being trained in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and I unfortunately had to sit through many of these lectures because every agency loves CBT. It's cheap and it's quick, and agencies love therapy that's cheap and quick.
Benefit therapy, CBT.
Oh yes, CBT. Now every therapist who's listening to this is deleting our podcast from their player. So when I would sit down, when I would be part of these CBT training series, the lecturer would always take digs at Freudian psychotherapy every single time, Ellie. They would use the first 5 minutes to say all his ideas are bunk and childhood blah, 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 and it's all a waste of time, and always. And really the message was that I think, in my humble opinion, these people got too caught up with things like Oedipus complex and some of Freud's more, let's call it, creative envisions of how the unconscious plays itself out. And they throw the baby out with the bathwater when they say that your childhood and your upbringing and stuff has no relevance on your life today, which I think is insanity.
Right.
To say that my upbringing and my past doesn't play itself out. So you have to be blind to not see how your past plays itself out. So when this idea of flushing it all down the drain, my thoughts on that is that people who do that are doing that likely in the same way that they held on too tight to the relationship when it was alive, meaning it's the same process. When the relationship was there, everything was important. Everything was are we in love? Like, everything had a sort of a certain orientation towards the we-ness of it all.
Interesting.
And that's what made me wake up in the morning, and the sun was shinier, and my identity was we. And of course, if I'm being propped up in my relationship because I have a lack of self, and the only way that I feel that I am more of a self is when I'm with you, well, then when it's over, for whatever reason, whether it's an affair or whether it's because the relationship has run its course, it doesn't make a difference. I have to, of course, flush that out because it's too painful to think that my self was only a self with you in it. And the idea that now that you're gone, that the vacuous part of me is so apparent would be too painful, that cause too much cognitive dissonance. So of course I've got to get rid of all memories of you in some sort of an immature attempt, my humble opinion, an immature attempt to create a faux independence, to create a fake, I'm okay, I don't need any of this kind, and it was just one big mistake.
Right.
As a therapist, I like that because that person is going to be back in my office over and over again. It's a great way to make a living. I'm joking. I don't want people to keep coming back to my office.
I mean, I do wonder also, like, I see so often on the internet in different, mediums, this sort of pattern of where you live your entire life from, say, the age of 15 to 30, either in love or in heartbreak. And there's kind of no other state. Like, so like you just ping pong back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I'm like, okay, so is there any other life other than that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's you're bringing back a memory, Ellie, when I would be I would be out of relationship, and for each part of that ping pong that you're talking about, I would always have a song or a lyric that encapsulated. Right. So that's the right. One lyric I'm thinking of right now, if you want to, it's a beautiful song by a band that only had one hit called Grantley Buffalo in the 90s. I don't know if you remember, they had a song called If I
oh, now I know exactly what that song is.
No, anyways, I'm going to share the video with you. So they were a band that did sort of Americana pop. Right. They only had one hit, Mockingbirds. That was the song, Mockingbirds. Anyways, they had a ballad, and the line in the ballad was something about, you are able to put things down that I can't let go of, or something like that, that you have a lightness to you that I can't let go of. And whenever this relationship I was in, whenever it would end, I would like take my record player, because it was records back then, take the needle and play that line over and over. And it was like this ritualistic prayer almost of comfort to me, that yes, you get me, you understand the predicament that I'm in. And it was sort of wrapped up in this melancholic, romance or something.
Right.
It was just so beautiful.
It was deep. It was all very deep. Very deep, very deep, and very in a dramatic, very narcissistic, young 20s way. But I think, Ellie, that we've talked about this before. I think it's a continuum. I think that people who orient their sense of self towards relationship, Dr. Bowen and Dr. Murray Bowen, founder of family systems therapy, used to say that people regulate their anxiety in one of 4 ways. I'm going to muck this up. So if anyone's a family systems therapist and you're getting upset right now, whatever, leave me alone. Okay. So, fourth thing, number 1, drugs and alcohol. So we regulate our anxiety with drugs, alcohol, food, that kind of a thing. And number 2, sex and relationships. And a third one would be work, meaning that when we get anxious, we are programmatically oriented towards doing one of those 3 things. But it's a continuum, meaning that the more immature you are, the less, the more vague your principles are, which means the more vague your life goals are, which means the more vague your hobbies are. You're going to orient yourself towards a life of meaning, towards a relationship. So I feel fulfilled with my life when I have a partner. If I don't have a partner, I dedicate a lot of time and energy to try to get a partner. And I remember when I was growing up, that was true for me. When, Ellie, what's interesting? When I started taking guitar lessons in my late teens, and when I was getting into bands, I remember thinking, that's so funny. I'm not dating as much. I'm not as anxious about being in a relationship. When my bands would end, it's like, what am I doing with my life? Dating again and dating and dating and dating. It was really interesting, actually. So I think it's a continuum, and I think that and again, don't shoot the messenger. I am just sharing what the data seems to suggest. When you look at teenagers in high school, I think things are changing, but generally, teenage boys orient themselves towards sports and competition, and their sense of meaning is, I got to score a goal, I get a touchdown, or whatever. Like you see this with boys a lot, or the video
boys,
games, a lot of video games, gaming,
exactly.
But if you look at school, the boys who are really academic, like, gear themselves towards school. So there's all of those sort of outer pieces.
But when I was a therapist in Vancouver, working with adolescents, it was the girls that were coming in and were having a lot of problems. And I would say 90% of their problems were either relationship with their girlfriends or a relationship with their boyfriends, or if they were gay, a girlfriend. But my point is, a lot of their inner life and a lot of their meaning revolved around either I'm in a relationship or I'm out of a relationship, which makes you very susceptible to the ebbs and flows and moods and feelings of relationship. And the boys just didn't have that kind of, ping ponging back and forth. So that's my thinking about that.
But that, I think, without going too much into like sociology, which I'm definitely not an expert in, but, girls are really acculturated towards their lives being about relationships, and boys are acculturated to their lives being about their pursuits. And so, I think that creates a self-identity that's based in those things. And when those things aren't going well, then things start to fall apart, because that's your center. We see that when men retire. Suddenly they have no idea who they are anymore unless they've made a good plan. It's a very big thing. Or if they get sick, God forbid, and can't do the things that they used to do. And for women, it's, and look, again, some men have this, some women have that. But I definitely see that if you center yourselves around your relationship, that the only way I know myself is in relationship, then you're stuck once the relationships aren't working. So I like what you're saying, because what could be in between heartbreak and being in love is, what is my life about? Just me. What am I interested in? What do I love? What am I passionate about? What's my purpose other than being in relationships? And I think that's a really great question that people are often afraid to ask.
Now, I think things are changing. I think they're changing for, in some cases, the better, and in some cases, there's quite a bit of anxiety in our culture. However, young girls these days are growing up with moms who work, who are very involved with hobbies. In some cases, moms who are making more money than their partners or ex-partners. There's a lot of change from when I was growing up.
Right.
And I think that this will continue. I don't think that things are going to swing back to the 1950s. And so I think what's going to continue to happen, although, Ellie, what's fascinating, by the way, one of the new things that are coming out, which again, I don't, like you, I'm not a sociologist. So I just read what I read, and I don't know how accurate the data is. According to what I'm hearing, that seems to be quite concerning, is that younger people aren't having sex. They're not getting in trouble in the way that they used to in terms of promiscuous sex. I'm talking about teenagers, young adults. Yeah. They're not getting in a relationship as much. There isn't that drive to get into a relationship as much. Amongst young people, this is mid-20s, there's less of an interest for marriage, less of an interest for parents. I think people in my profession see this as symptomatic of a certain amount of chronic anxiety that currently exists, and in some ways lack of meaning and fear about how am I going to do it? I can't afford a home. I can't do, so what's the whole point? Why bother? And then really, what's the whole point of anything, sort of a thing.
Right.
But so it's interesting how we continue on, humanity continues on, and anxiety just takes different forms and shapes. I'd imagine our parents would think, I wish I had my kids had those problems when I was growing up. But some people say this is a much more profound problem. The problems that we had when we were teenagers were, for the most part, Ellie, when we think of our friends, transitory, meaning we grew out of it. This type of stuff, again, I'm not a sociologist, but what I'm hearing is they're not growing out of, meaning these are people in their 30s and 40s. And Ellie, we know of a community in the Jewish community in New York. It's a very hip, very intelligent, modern Orthodox community where just a whole bunch of singles being single.
Yeah.
In a community we're getting
married. In a lot of cities, right.
I'm thinking specifically, I think it's the Upper West Side or something in New York, where I've worked with some people in that community in my practice, and they'll say to me like, oh, I date and we date and we just keep dating. Right. That people aren't settling down, that marriage is, maybe we will, maybe we won't. And that it is in that community that really puts an emphasis on be fruitful and multiply from the Torah and marriage. That community is just coexisting with work, gym, and dating. Right. And they're doing it into their 30s and 40s. So it's depending on if you believe that family is important and parents are important, kids are important. This is a serious conundrum, right, for society. But anyways, blah blah blah. Let's come back to black coffee.
Yeah. So tell me what, so that was one of the things I liked. I thought it was very interesting to think about how much do we leave behind at the end of a relationship, and maybe we'll sort of intertwine that with whatever lyrics you decided to focus on. What did you pull out of this?
So the one that moved me that I wanted to touch on is the line or lines. We looked happy, so what happened? Because now it's 2 a.m. and we're out here asking, where did we go? So first of all, no one is out here at 2 a.m. and we are asking, where did we go? Because no one does that. She's probably outside and he's doing whatever he's doing or she's doing. I don't know. She was in a relationship to whomever. So I always find it interesting in my practice when people don't want to take a stand on something and they'll say, we had a great vacation. And I look at my peripheral vision of their partner, and their partner is looking at me like, no, I did not have a good vacation, but now I can't say it because my partner roped me into it. So in my practice, I always tell people it is a marker of emotional maturity to focus on I statements, not we statements. So I had a very good vacation leaves room for your partner to say if they had a good time or not, which leads to a whole other discussion about why that's important. Let's just put that on the shelf. Let's come back to this idea of we looked happy, so what happened? So my way of thinking about this isn't actually, I don't think it's that complex, although I think Esther Perel in her book Mating in Captivity does a very good job of explaining what happens to relationships over time. And one of her arguments, and I think it's very compelling, is that what's that je ne sais quoi of young love that we just is so delicious. Well, it's not really love per se. It's some mixture of novelty and danger, right? You don't know the person, you don't know anything about them. It's some part of the chase of getting someone to like you, being liked and adored, and of course sexual chemistry. And so you put that into a pot and you stir it around, and it's like emotional meth, it's just, by the way, just for the record, I've never done meth, but I've heard it's very addictive. So that, it seems, so when people say in my office, 5 years into a relationship, 10 years, 20 years, what happened? I will, depending on their sense of humor, I might say to them, well, do you have a hypothesis? Like I'm always like, well, I don't know. Do you have an answer? Because to my way of thinking is, how could it not happen this way? The idea that when we first meet, that somehow that is sustainable, that kind of intense focus on other, that kind of intense focus of the novelty and the fusion, that's supposed to last, is almost like expecting, you go to Baskin and Robbins, Ellie, and you get like a huge sundae with whipped cream. You ever notice by the fourth bite, your senses are, you actually don't taste the sugar because your mouth has been exposed to such an explosive.
There's actually a really great commentary on this that I recently read from Abraham Twersky, who is both a rabbi and a psychologist, and he wrote a book. Psychiatrist. He wrote a book called Addictive Thinking, I think it was. And so one of the things that he talks about is that addicts, which by the way, I would put all of us in that category because we all have something that we turn to in an addictive way to cope. But addicts tend to confuse intensity with intimacy. And when you confuse intensity with intimacy, you're baffled at the end of the intensity as to why you don't feel close. Right. And I think it was such an interesting, because intensity feels like closeness. It's like, wow, it's that giant sundae, it's the roller coaster. But intimacy takes time, it takes listening. It's a much more kind of quiet but deep effort. And I think so many times people confuse the intensity at the beginning of the relationship for the intimacy that's supposed to develop as the relationship grows and matures and time passes. And I thought that was, for me, it was a huge distinction when I read between those two things, the difference.
That's beautiful. I never heard that before from Twersky. I'm usually used to his takes on addiction as addiction,
Mm.
not in relationship, but that's great. I heard him speak, as an aside, I heard him speak, by the way, in Vancouver. And
Wow.
I asked him a question during the Q&A. I said, Dr. Rabbi Twersky, you've written a lot of books. They all sound the same. I hope I'm not insulting you, but what's up with that? And he laughed,
Mm.
and he said two things, both of which were funny, I found. The first thing he says, sometimes you have to say the same thing over and over for people to get it. And the other thing he said is, and it's not a bad way to make a living, which I thought was great. Okay,
yeah,
so
he was a gem.
I want to share a quote here that I think is tongue-in-cheek, but very deep and a bit controversial, but I'm going to share it based on this one line. It comes from another rabbi, a rabbi and family therapist, Ed Friedman. This is the late Ed Friedman. So this is what he has to say. This is what he has to say about premarital counseling. So this is his quote. And by the way, Ed Friedman, who was a rabbi who did a lot of premarital counseling,
right,
would have seen a lot of couples over the years of his 50-year career. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is his observation of the beginning of relationship. Quote, the most effective form of premarital counseling would be working with the parents of the bride and groom when they are about the age of 6. I just love that. So
that's amazing.
Let's just unpack that just a little bit. I don't think Ed Friedman was being tongue-in-cheek. I literally think what he was saying. Look, when Aviv addresses this thing, it's 2 a.m. and we're out here asking, where did we go? I think what Ed Friedman is suggesting is where you went and your partner went goes back a long way of programming that happened when you were likely between the ages of 0 and 6.
Right.
And you carry that programming out the rest of your life. And it's in relationship, when we get in relationship, that we have a shot at undoing some of those emotional knots. But it's hard. It's harder than most people think. Mm-hmm. So there are 2 ways to deal with this. One way, Ed Friedman, tongue-in-cheek, is saying is that if parents understand that there's a multi-generational process about how maturity gets passed down, then there are things that we can do when our kids are in our home to try to just a little bit inch up our functioning beyond our parents' functioning, vis-a-vis how intimate we are with whomever, what kind of, how much anxiety we bring to our parenting, blah, 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 blah. So what he's saying is there's one way to help out our kids for their future relationships is not to focus on the kids, but to focus on us as adults now, in the here and now, which will have an impact through osmosis on our kids. That's what Ed Friedman means when he says premarital counseling. Sure, give me the parents when the kids are 6, which again, I think it's funny, but I think there's some truth there. The other way, of course, is when Aviv says this thing. Now, granted, Ellie, she's young. She will have many years to experiment with this. What I hope happens for someone like Aviv and her peers is that she moves beyond this idea at some point of, we looked happy, so what happened to, I'm happy and this is going to change, or I'm happy, I'm getting ready for the next phase, which is a more deeper, meaningful, more nuanced connection, and that this is supposed to end. It is not supposed to continue.
Right.
And the question
Yeah,
changes
that's interesting.
Not where did we go, but where are we going to go? Or rather, where am I going to go when the novelty and the fumes of a new relationship end? Who am I at the other side of that thing? Right. And that hopefully, you know, someone on this process can cultivate the same way we eat spinach for the first time. We're like, nah, but we grow for a taste for that much more complex but nuanced, healthier food thing.
Right.
Same thing with relationship, that we expand our palate away from the novelty and the newness and the sexiness to a much more subtle understanding of what intimacy is through the good times, right, and the hard times, et cetera, et cetera. So those are my thoughts about that.
You know, that my ultimate life happiness doesn't depend on whether or not this relationship works out or not. That my ultimate life happiness depends on me. And this relationship is part of that, but it is not the whole of my identity and my life in its entirety, which, as you said, just puts way too much pressure on a relationship. And then when the relationship ends, like, your life ends? Wait a minute, what does that mean? I mean, it's part of that, very immature Romeo and Juliet situation where, like, if I can't have the person I love, then my entire life is over. Like, really, your life is just about the other person? It really is an interesting way to think about things, but I think so many of us are caught in that idea because that's the idea that's been floated in the culture, like this romantic, like, everything in my life is about you.
Well, Ellie, we talked about this many times. One of the central themes of my first book comes from the film Jerry Maguire, You Complete Me. And when I first saw that film in the theater, you can hear a gasp. Everyone's sort of like, when that line was said, because who doesn't want to feel, especially if you're watching that film and you're single, which I was, I believe, this feeling of, I want to meet someone where all of my boo-boos and all of my pain and all of my loneliness is just, it evaporates within a moment of meeting you. And of course it does feel like, and that's what's so beautiful about this, that it actually does feel that way for the first, few days, couple of weeks, couple of months. But it's not supposed to continue. It's supposed to evolve and change. The movies in our culture don't tell you that, though. What they tell you, what they say to you is that when it ends, this is where your friends will say to you, it shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that hard. If you were really with the right person, I hear this often in my practice.
when you're in a relationship and there's conflict, or things are challenging, or you're on opposite sides of a situation, like, your friends might say, oh, it shouldn't be so hard to be in relationship. If it was a good relationship, everything would be easy. That's what you mean they're saying.
Yeah, because I think what ends up happening is, because there so many people out there, I think, are the blind leading the blind around this kind of stuff. So everyone's really anxious about relationship because it's not easy to figure out. Again, our great grandparents didn't sit there and wonder about self-actualizing ourselves in our relationships. Our great grandparents, there was a utility to marriage or something. You had a farm, right? You needed lots of kids to work the farm, right? And I mean, there's a utility to the whole thing of keeping the machinery going. You're not asking yourself, how meaningful is this to me? It's like, we got to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and tend to the fields or something. That has changed. That has changed. So we ask ourselves questions like, am I actualizing the best of myself in this relationship? And I'm not saying that's a bad or good thing. I'm just saying it is what it is. But what you have, though, is we have a culture that really, we live on the fumes of the good times. And when bad times happen, people interpret that as being bad, as opposed to a sign that something is amiss and there's some growth potential here.
Right.
And so I always, I'm whenever people come into my office and they say, well, I spoke to a friend of mine and they said to me that, if this is a good marriage, it shouldn't be this way. Or if this is a good relationship, and in this song, like Aviv, high school, you can hear this conversation in high school, right? A teenage boy or girl going up to their friends and saying, she said this to me, and one of his friends saying to him, oh, well, then she's clearly the wrong one, because if she loved you, she wouldn't say that. Right. And of course, the dirty little secret that marriage therapists know in my profession is, oh no, that's exactly what people say when they get really hurt or they're backed into a corner. I mean, some of the worst things I've heard people say to each other is sibling to sibling, parent to child, lover to lover.
Right.
Strangers don't know where to stick the knife, but people who love you do. So we really, Ellie, one of the things we talked about before picking this song is it's a breakup song, and there's so much we can say. But I actually want to leave this with a breadcrumb, because so many other love songs that we're going to touch on, songs in the pop culture genre, we'll touch on this. So I'm going to, those are my concluding comments, and I want to say some other stuff for other songs that touch on the idea of relationships ending. Do you have any final thoughts yourself about black coffee?
I think it also for me brings up the idea around, and on what you said, which is often the things that trigger us the most have the most potential for some kind of growth. And we often forget that when we're in relationships with ourselves and definitely with other people, and definitely during a breakup, because just because you're getting triggered in a breakup doesn't mean you're supposed to get back together, but it does mean that you need to deal with whatever it is that's difficult for you about the fact that this is ending and now you're going to be on your own. So I would say I think those are some really, really interesting ideas that come out of these few lines of the song and what you've been speaking about for me.
Excellent. I would like to say for those who are looking for a good black coffee, Boxcar Social is an excellent coffee shop in Toronto if you're here, and Propeller. Excellent black coffee.
This is not a sponsored ad, but it's just a nerd call out to another coffee nerd who would definitely appreciate it. Amazing. Okay, so that's the playlist song for this week. Thanks so much, Avrum. That was really great. Please, everyone listening, remember to subscribe and share. Please leave us a rating or a review wherever you're listening to our podcast. If you want to see more from Avrum and myself about these topics, you can check out our other podcast, If You're a Parent. There's a podcast called Pop Parenting, or there's a blog that goes with the show. If you want to hear the songs that are on the show, please check out the playlist on both Spotify and Apple Music. And if you want to get in touch with us and send us a voice message, you can do so on Anchor in the liner notes, or you can send us an email with ideas for topics or songs or anything you'd like to hear us talk about. Avrum, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Ellie.
Take care, everyone.